Hey everyone, welcome to the first lesson of section 2, and technically the first feature development lesson of the course. Before getting started in this lesson, you should have your dev environment set up with all the dependencies. I'm using Ruby 3.2.3, I have Rails 8.0.2 installed, and Node version 20.10.0. If you don't have these installed, or at the minimum versions, go back to the previous lesson and read the documentation that guides you through that process. Now, to start or create a Ruby on Rails application, you're going to run the Rails new command, which takes a handful of options. Let's start by running the command with just the -- help flag. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this out. I'm going to run Rails new -- help. Okay, and if we scroll up to the top, this gives us documentation page with usage and all the different options and a lot more. So if we look at the usage right here, we can see it tells us to run Rails new, the app path, which is usually just the name of the application, and then the different options. And if we look down here, we see the options. Mine is formatted pretty poorly due to the bold font size, but you can see most options have two different ways of writing them. There is the verbose option, and then there is the shorthand option. And we'll be passing the Rails new command a handful of options, starting with the -d option right here, which is for databases. If you have PostgreSQL set up, we'll be able to pass that to this flag. If you don't pass anything, it says that you'll default to SQLite 3. The other options that we'll be using, if we scroll down, we'll be using the -j flag for our JavaScript, and we're going to be using ESBuild for that. And then for -c, this is for our CSS framework, and we'll be passing in Bootstrap. Now, scrolling down a bit further, you see we have some runtime options. We have some Rails options, like running -- help, we just saw that. And then below we have a description of what this generator does, and then some example usages to help get you started. Okay, so with that, we can go ahead and clear this out, and we can run our Rails new command. So let's do Rails new, and I'm gonna call the app safe pass app. And then we're gonna go ahead and pass our -c flag for CSS, and we'll pass Bootstrap. Then we're gonna do -j, and we'll do ESBuild. And then finally -d for PostgreSQL. And if you don't have PostgreSQL installed, you can leave this blank, don't pass the D or any other type of database, and you'll default to SQLite 3. Now let's give this a once over just to make sure everything looks good. Okay, this looks good, and let's go ahead and run it now. This can take a bit of time, so I'm going to fast forward the video. When this is done, we'll head into the app and see what this generated for us. Okay, looks like the Rails new command ran successfully. Now, before we get started, I want to scroll up just a little bit, point out something that you may have noticed. You may have seen these red squiggly lines here, and I wanted to reassure you that these are just deprecation warnings, letting us know there's some issue between SAS and compiling our Bootstrap, but it won't affect our development or production builds. Now, scrolling back down, I'm going to cd into our application, and then if you're running VS Code, you can run the code command, and it'll open up for you in VS Code. If you're not using VS Code, you'll just navigate to wherever you put the application and open it up the old-fashioned way. Now I'm going to go ahead and close this and then bump it up. Now looking at this, if you're new to Rails, your first thought might be, wow, there's a lot going on here. And you're not wrong, there is a lot going on here. But don't feel overwhelmed. There's really only one main spot where we'll be doing about 99% of the work. And that's this app directory right here. The rest of the application down here is mostly boilerplate configuration, which Rails sets up for us out of the box. This is one of the many reasons why Rails is so popular. It allows you to focus primarily on development, not configuration. All right, so let's start going through this app directory. We first have our assets directory, and in here we have a builds directory. This is where our CSS and JavaScript builds get compiled to, and I'll show you how the build happens in a little bit. Next, we have images, and as the name suggests, this is where you would store your local images. Next, we have style sheets. While this course won't go too in-depth into CSS, I'm going to show you how I generally like to set up and organize my CSS directories. So that's it for the assets. Now, depending on exactly which version of Rails you're using, you may see a channels directory in here, but we won't be doing anything with that, so you don't have to worry about it. And then next we have controllers. We'll be doing a significant amount of work here. Controllers handle all requests. They expose the domain model to the web, process incoming parameters, set caching headers, and render templates. Next, we have helpers. We'll be doing some work here. Helpers keep our view code clean of any business logic or excessive code. Now, moving on to JavaScript. As the name implies, this is where our JavaScript lives. We'll be using Stimulus.js, which is built into Hotwire, and we'll be using ESBuild to compile it. Next, we have jobs. Here you can in-queue different jobs to handle asynchronous work. We won't be doing anything with jobs in this application. Next, we have mailers. If your application is sending out emails, this is where the logic and email templates live. Again, we won't be using mailers for our application. Moving on to models. This is the database layer of our application. Models generally represent a table in the database. So as a simple example, think of a blog application. There would be a post model and a comment model. Each model would be a table in the database. Rails makes working with models super easy by leveraging Active Record. And we'll dive deep into Active Record using model associations, encrypting sensitive data, data validations, and using its built-in functions to easily query our database. Finally, we have views. And again, depending on the exact version of Rails, you may or may not see this PWA directory. So our views, this is the templating layer. This is the UI that will be seen in the browser by our users. We'll be using ERB, which allows us to cleanly and easily embed Ruby into our HTML. So in a nutshell, what we just went over is essentially the MVC pattern, Model View Controller. Rails sets this up for you very nicely while also including a ton of other tools to easily build full stack apps. Now, I mentioned that we'd be spending about 99% of our time here. The other couple places we'll be doing some work/configuration is the config directory. So scrolling down, we have a bunch of subdirectories and files here. And we're going to be adding in our own initializer, so we'll be putting a file here. Scrolling down, we're going to be updating our routes. We'll be setting up routes for both the web application and the JSON API. The other directory will be the DB directory. While we won't be writing much code here, we will be checking this directory out to view our database migrations, our database schema file, and we'll eventually add to our seeds.rb file so we don't have to keep manually adding in our entries. Now, the final directory that I want to touch is the bin directory. So let's go ahead and close this and scroll up, close our app, and go right here to our bin directory. The bin directory contains the Rails scripts that we'll use to start our app and help with other things like setup and deployment. Now, we won't actually be writing any code here, but I wanted to briefly cover the script we'll use to run our application, and that's the bin dev script. So right here. Go ahead and close this. This first line here just indicates that this script is a shell script. This next block of code is essentially looking for a gem called foreman. If it can't find it, it will install it for us. This line right here is ensuring that Rails is running on port 3000. And this final line, which is the most important, we're using foreman to run a file called procfile.dev. And if we open up our navigator and go, let's close this, and then scroll down to procfile.dev and open that up, by using foreman to run this file, we can run all three of these processes at the same time. And so the web process is, if you're familiar with Rails, it's just running the bin Rails server command. There's another option included, but you don't have to worry about that. Our JS process is running a yarn script, and our CSS is also running a yarn script. So let's go ahead and open up our package.json file real quick. And we can view these scripts now. So here's our watch CSS script, which essentially runs these two scripts. And this compiles our CSS into the builds directory that we saw earlier. And then our build script is doing the same thing for our JavaScript, putting it into our build directory. Okay, so that's a pretty quick rundown of the Rails app. There's clearly a lot we didn't cover, but it's really not necessary for this course. And now that we know how to start our server, we can check out the app in the browser. We just need to first create our database. So let's do that by opening up our terminal. And to create a database, you can do Rails db:create. Now I already have my DB created, so I'm not going to run this command, but you should. And after running this command, you should see a message saying a development and test database had been created for you. Now that we have our database set up, let's go ahead and run bin/dev. Now, opening this up real quick, you're going to see those deprecation warnings that we saw when we first generated the application. Don't worry about those. And scrolling back up, you'll also notice that we now have our different processes running. And you can see that they're indicated by this web, JS, and CSS. Now let's head into our browser and take a look at our application. So make sure you're going to localhost 3000 and hit enter. Okay, great. We see the standard Rails landing page. So I know this one might have been a bit long and not super exciting, but it was important to cover the architecture of the Rails app. In the next lesson, we're going to start writing code. We'll get rid of this landing page and start building the foundation of our application. I'll see you there.